She was hired to save books that no one else could touch without destroying, and in the process she ended up saving the heart of a man everyone thought was beyond reach. Can you imagine having hands so delicate that the whole world considers them useless, until the day they become the only thing capable of preserving a vanishing treasure? But this story happened in the rural heartland of Georgia back in 1923, in a time when being too gentle could cost you everything. Before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're watching this story from. I love knowing that these narratives reach so many different places. And if you love stories about overcoming odds and finding true love, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a thing. Now come with me, because this story is going to move you from beginning to end. Clara Miller was 24 years old and had just lost her 5th job in less than 2 years. She stood at the front door of her employer's house, clutching a small bundle of her clothes, while Mrs. Higgins finished saying everything Clara had heard so many times before. "You're a good girl. I have nothing against your character," the woman said, her expression a mix of pity and impatience. "But you are too slow. You have no backbone with the other staff. When I tell you to bring order to the kitchen, you ask them, 'Please.' When I need you to command respect, you lower your voice. This isn't a charity house. I need someone who knows how to take charge." Clara just nodded, a gesture as soft as everything else about her. "I'm sorry to have disappointed you, ma'am," she murmured in that voice that was barely a whisper. Her honey-colored eyes were misty, but she blinked rapidly, trying to hold back the tears. She didn't succeed completely. One slid down her pale cheek, and she wiped it away with the back of her hand, almost ashamed, as if crying were just another defect to be forgiven. Mrs. Higgins sighed and handed over her wages in coins. "You should try something else, child," she said with harsh sincerity. "Housework isn't for you. It requires people with grit. You are too sweet for this kind of life." Clara tucked the coins into the pocket of her worn dress and thanked her quietly. She left that house in Savannah under the harsh March sun, walking slowly down the cobblestone streets. She carried everything she owned in a faded fabric bundle: 3 mended dresses, a hairbrush, a spare pair of shoes, and an old book she had found years ago at a scrapyard. It was an antique volume of poems, with yellowed pages and a loose binding. Clara had stitched the spine back together with fine thread and infinite patience, using a common sewing needle because she couldn't afford proper tools. That book was the most precious thing she owned, not for the content of the poems, which she didn't fully understand, but because it had been the first time her delicate hands were good for something others deemed impossible. The binding was so wrecked, the scrapyard owner was going to toss it in the fire. Clara asked to keep it, took it home, and for 3 nights straight worked with meticulous care, stitching page by page back into place. When she finished, the book was whole again. Imperfect, but whole. No one saw the value in it. Her older brother, Robert, had laughed when she showed him. "Why waste time with old junk?" he asked with disdain. "You should be looking for a husband, not playing with scrap paper." But Clara couldn't explain the feeling she got when she held fragile pages and managed to save them. It was as if her hands, which the whole world considered weak, had a secret purpose that no one else could see. Now she walked back to her brother's house, where she had been living on charity for 8 months, ever since their mother passed away. The house was on the outskirts of the city, a simple 3-room structure where Robert lived with his wife, Martha, and their 2 small children. Clara slept in a corner of the living room, on a thin mattress on the floor. When she arrived, Martha was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She was a woman of loud voice and decisive gestures, everything Clara was not. She looked at her sister-in-law with an expression that showed she already knew what had happened. "Lost the job again?" she asked without preamble. Clara nodded, her voice failing. "I'm sorry, Martha. I'll look for another one first thing tomorrow. I promise I won't be a burden." Martha dropped the wooden spoon into the pot with a clatter. "Clara, we've already talked about this 3 times. You can't keep living here without paying your way. We barely have enough for us. Robert works from sunup to sundown, and I take care of the house and the kids. We can't feed another mouth." "I know," Clara replied, her voice even lower. "I know that. I'll find something, I promise." Martha wiped her hands on her apron and crossed her arms. Her expression softened slightly, but the resolve remained. "Look, you're a good girl. I have nothing against you, but the truth is, you aren't cut out for domestic work. You're too delicate, too timid. The ladies will keep sending you away, and we can't keep taking you back every time." Clara felt her chest tighten. "Where will I go?" She asked, and this time her voice came out so thin it almost disappeared. Martha sighed deeply. "You have until the end of the week to find something. If you don't, you'll have to go to St. Mary's shelter. They take in women without families. It's not ideal, but at least you'll have a roof." St. Mary's was a shelter for the destitute, the sick, and those with no place in the world. Clara felt shame burn her face. She didn't want to end up there. Not yet. Not at 24. But she couldn't blame Martha. Her sister-in-law was right. Clara really couldn't keep a job. She was slow, shy, incapable of commanding respect. She cried easily. She avoided conflict. She lowered her head when someone raised their voice. "All right," she murmured. "I'll find something by the end of the week." That night, lying on the thin mattress in the corner of the room, Clara lay awake listening to the sounds of the sleeping house. Robert snored in the next room. One of the children whimpered in their sleep, then settled down. The wood of the floorboards creaked as the night temperature dropped. Clara thought of her mother. Mrs. Marianne had been a seamstress, a woman of skilled hands and natural patience. It was she who had taught Clara to sew, to embroider, to work with delicacy. But Mrs. Marianne was also decisive when she needed to be. She knew how to collect payment from clients. She took no nonsense. Clara had inherited only the delicacy, not the firmness, and the world had no room for someone who was only one thing. The next morning, Clara woke early and went into the city centre. She went from shop to shop asking if they needed help. At every place, she received the same answer. "We're looking for a girl with experience and good presentation." At 2 places, the owners looked her up and down, noted the mended dress, the slumped posture, the barely audible voice, and dismissed her before she even finished asking. On the 3rd day of searching, Clara was sitting on a bench in the main square, tired and discouraged, when she saw a newspaper abandoned nearby. She picked it up and began to leaf through it distractedly. In the classified ads section, in the bottom corner of the page, a small text caught her eye. "Wanted. Person with delicate hands and extreme patience for restoration work at a country estate. Requires meticulous care and dedication. Fair pay and room and board included. Interested parties present themselves at 187 Bay Street by Friday." Clara read it 3 times. Delicate hands, extreme patience, meticulous care. These were exactly the words her former employers used against her, but here they were written as desired qualifications. Her heart beat faster. It could be anything. It might not work out, but it was the first time she had seen an ad asking for exactly what she had. She wrote down the address on a scrap of paper and went there immediately. Bay Street was in the commercial district near the riverfront. Number 187 was a law office with a discreet plaque on the door. Clara entered, her legs trembling. An elderly gentleman with grey hair sat behind a desk covered in papers. He looked at her with a neutral expression. "Can I help you, miss?" Clara swallowed hard. "I came about the ad in the paper," she said with a shaky voice. "About the work with delicate hands." The lawyer studied her for a long moment. "Your name?" "Clara Miller." "Age?" 24. He noted something down. "Do you have experience with restoration?" Clara hesitated. "I don't have professional experience," she admitted, "but I know how to work with care. I've restored a few old books I found. By myself. I learned by watching and trying." The lawyer raised his eyebrows. "Old books?" Clara nodded, and with a courage she didn't know she possessed, pulled the book of poems she carried from her bundle. "This one was completely destroyed," she explained as she showed it. "The binding was loose, pages torn. I stitched it back. It took 3 days, but I managed." The lawyer took the book and examined it with attention. He turned the pages slowly, observed the irregular but firm stitching of the spine, noted the care with which each page had been realigned. His expression changed. "You did this alone?" he asked with a different tone, almost respectful. "Yes, sir," Clara replied. "It's not perfect, I know. I don't have the proper tools, but I managed to save the book." The lawyer remained silent for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, he placed the book on the desk and looked at Clara with a serious expression. "The job is at an estate in the country, near Statesboro. The owner is Mr. Bernard Hawthorne. He inherited his father's library with over 800 antique volumes. Most are deteriorating. Mold, silverfish, destroyed bindings. He needs someone who can restore them. He's tried hiring professionals from Savannah, but they all charge fortunes and guaranteed no results. So he decided to look for someone different." Clara felt a mix of hope and fear. "I've never worked with that many books," she admitted with the honesty that always disadvantaged her. "But I can try. I promise I will take all the care in the world." "The job is at the estate," repeated the lawyer. "You will live there. Mr. Hawthorne will provide a room, meals, and a monthly wage, but it is an isolated place. The estate is far from the city. You would have to commit to staying at least 6 months. Do you accept these conditions?" Clara didn't need to think twice. "Yes, I accept," she answered, with a conviction that surprised even herself. The lawyer nodded and prepared the papers. "The wagon leaves tomorrow morning very early, 6 o'clock at the edge of town, near the 0-mile marker. Bring only what is necessary. Mr. Hawthorne is a serious man, but fair. If you do good work, you won't regret it." Clara signed the papers with a trembling hand, thanked him 3 times, and left the office with her heart pounding. For the first time in a long while, she felt something akin to hope. When she arrived at her brother's house and told Martha, her sister-in-law seemed relieved and worried at the same time. "A farm in the country?" she repeated, frowning. "You don't even know this man, Clara. What if it's dangerous?" "The lawyer said he is serious," Clara replied. "And I don't have much choice, Martha. It's this or the shelter." Martha sighed and agreed with a nod. "You're right. At least you'll have a place to stay and food to eat. And who knows, maybe out in the country you'll fare better. Sometimes the big city isn't for everyone." That night, Clara organized her few belongings. She folded the 3 dresses with care, wrapped her shoes in a cloth, packed her hairbrush, and she set aside the book of poems. She looked at it for a long time, running her fingers over the spine she had stitched. That book had changed something in her. It had shown that her hands were good for something that mattered, even if no one valued it. Now she was going to a place where maybe, just maybe, what she was wouldn't be seen as a weakness. The next morning, Clara woke before sunrise. She put on her least mended dress, pinned her light brown hair into a low bun, and grabbed her bundle. Martha got up to say goodbye, and to Clara's surprise, hugged her quickly. "Good luck, sister," she said, her voice choked. "You're a good girl. You deserve better than what life has given you." Clara thanked her with tears in her eyes and walked out into the dark of dawn. The streets of Savannah were still empty, just a few workers starting the day. She reached the 0-mile marker as the sky began to lighten with shades of pink and orange. A large wagon was stopped there, pulled by 2 sturdy horses. The driver was a middle-aged man, his face marked by the sun, sporting a thick mustache. He looked at Clara and asked if she was the girl hired for the Silent Valley estate. She confirmed, and he pointed to the back of the wagon. "Settle in back there," he said without much ceremony. "The trip will take the whole day." Clara climbed into the wagon and sat on sacks of grain that served as a makeshift seat. There was another passenger, a young man who said he was going to work at a neighboring farm. They exchanged few words. The wagon began to move, leaving the city at a steady pace. Savannah was left behind. The cobblestone streets gave way to dirt roads. The houses close together were replaced by open fields. Clara watched everything with a mixture of fear and curiosity. She had never left the city. She had never gone beyond the immediate outskirts. The Georgia countryside opened up before her like a completely different world. Immense fields of deep green, gentle undulations of the land, a sky that seemed bigger than in the city. The air smelled different, a mix of damp earth, grass, and something she couldn't identify. The silence was profound, broken only by the sound of the wagon wheels on the road and the occasional song of a bird. They passed through small villages where the wagon stopped to deliver goods. Clara saw simple people, field workers, women carrying water in buckets. Everyone seemed busy, with a purpose. She wondered if she would fit into that world so different from the one she knew. In the middle of the afternoon, they stopped for a rest near a creek. The driver, who said his name was Otis, offered water and bread. Clara ate slowly, sitting in the shade of a tree, watching the water run over the stones. The sound was calming, almost musical. Otis sat beside her and spoke for the first time since the start of the trip. "Do you know who you're going to work for?" he asked, lighting a corn-husk cigarette. Clara shook her head. "I know it's Mr. Bernard Hawthorne, that he has a library that needs restoring." Otis blew out smoke and looked at the horizon. "Mr. Hawthorne is a good man, but closed off. He became a widower about 5 years ago. Since then, he hasn't been the same, lives practically alone on that huge estate. He has the hands who work the land, he has Mrs. Francis who cooks and keeps house, but he doesn't talk much to anyone, stays locked in that library all day long." Clara felt curiosity mixed with apprehension. "Is he difficult to deal with?" Otis shrugged. "He isn't cruel, if that's what you want to know. Just lonely. But fair. Pays well, treats the workers right. Just don't expect much conversation." They returned to the wagon and continued the journey. The sun began to lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Clara had never seen a sunset so beautiful. In the city, buildings and houses blocked the view. Here, the horizon was infinite. When night began to fall, Otis pointed ahead. "There it is," he said, "Silent Valley Estate." Clara looked and saw a large wooden gate with the name of the farm carved into a sign. The dirt road continued between tall oak trees draped in Spanish moss that formed a natural tunnel. In the distance, she could distinguish the lights of the main house. The wagon passed through the gate and followed the internal road. Clara felt her heart beating faster and faster. In a few minutes, her life was going to change completely. For better or worse, she didn't know yet. The main house came into full view when they exited the corridor of oaks. It was a wide and solid construction, stone and wood, with a broad veranda out front and a colonial roof. Lights burned in some windows. Around it there were smaller buildings, probably barns and worker housing. Everything was clean and well kept, but there was an air of loneliness about the place, as if the estate were merely existing, not living. Otis stopped the wagon in front of the main house and climbed down. He helped Clara down as well. "Wait here," he said. "I'll let them know you've arrived." He walked up the veranda steps and knocked on the door. Clara stood by the wagon, clutching her bundle against her chest, looking at that enormous house that would be her new home. The night air was fresh, almost cool. She could hear crickets singing somewhere nearby. The door opened and a middle-aged woman appeared. It must be the Mrs. Francis that Otis had mentioned. She spoke briefly with him, looked in Clara's direction, and waved for her to approach. Clara climbed the steps with trembling legs. The woman had a kind face, grey hair pulled back in a bun, and a clean apron over a simple dress. "You must be Miss Clara," she said with a motherly voice. "Welcome. I am Francis. I take care of the house and the kitchen. Come, I'll show you your room. You must be exhausted from the trip." Clara thanked her in a low voice and followed Francis inside. The interior was spacious and dim. There was heavy wooden furniture, rugs that were worn but clean, and the smell of beeswax mixed with what seemed to be smoke from an old fireplace. The walls were decorated with antique paintings, portraits of people Clara didn't know. Francis led Clara down a long hallway to a door at the end. She opened it and revealed a small but comfortable room. It had a single bed with a patchwork quilt, a bedside table, a simple wardrobe, and a window that looked out to the back of the house. "It's not big, but it's yours," Francis said. "The bathroom is just down the hall. Hot water is available after 6 in the evening. Tomorrow I'll show you the rest of the house. For now, rest. Shall I bring you some dinner?" Clara shook her head. "You don't need to trouble yourself, Mrs. Francis." "Nonsense," the woman replied with gentle firmness. "I'll be right back with a tray. You need to eat something." She left and closed the door. Clara stood alone in the room, looking around with a strange sensation. For the first time in her life, she had a room all to herself, not a corner of a living room with a mattress on the floor. It was a space that belonged only to her. She placed her bundle on the bed and sat beside it. Her hands trembled slightly. She was afraid of failing at the job, afraid of disappointing someone once again, afraid of being sent away with nowhere to return to. But there was also something different, a small spark, almost imperceptible, of something that might be hope. Francis returned minutes later with a tray containing hot soup, homemade bread and tea. She placed it on the bedside table and looked at Clara with an appraising but kind expression. "You seem scared, my child," she said. "No need to be afraid. Mr. Hawthorne might be quiet, but he isn't a bad man, and the work you're going to do is important to him. That library was his father's treasure. He wants very much to save those books." Clara nodded, trying to absorb the comforting words. "When will I meet him?" "Tomorrow morning," Francis replied. "He asked for you to rest today. The journey is long. Tomorrow after breakfast, he will show you the library and explain the work." Francis gave Clara's shoulder a loving pat and left, closing the door slowly. Clara ate the soup slowly, savoring the homemade seasoning and the comforting warmth. Afterward, she changed, putting on her oldest nightgown, and lay in bed. The mattress was firm but comfortable. The sheets smelled of sun and soap. Through the open window, she could hear the sounds of the country night, so different from the city sounds. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in many nights, slept deeply. Clara woke with the light of dawn entering through the window. For a brief moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory returned, the estate, the private room, the library she needed to save. She sat up in bed and took a deep breath. The air coming through the window was fresh and clean, carrying the scent of wet earth and grass. She got up, washed her face in the basin on the small table, and put on one of her mended dresses. She pinned her hair in the usual low bun, looked at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror on the wall, and tried to gather courage. Today she was going to meet Mr. Hawthorne. Today she was going to see the library that would determine whether she had a future or not. When she left the room, she found Francis in the kitchen preparing breakfast. The woman smiled upon seeing her. "Sleep well, child?" "I did, Mrs. Francis," Clara replied with a soft voice. "Better than in a long time?" Francis indicated the large wooden table in the center of the kitchen. "Sit there. I'll serve you coffee, bread with butter and cheese. Mr. Hawthorne has already had his coffee early, as always. He expects you in the library after you eat." Clara sat and accepted the steaming coffee Francis served. The kitchen was wide and welcoming, with a wood-burning stove, shelves full of jars of preserves, and a window overlooking a vegetable garden in the back. There was a good smell of fresh bread and strong coffee. Clara ate slowly, trying to calm the nerves that made her stomach turn. Frances sat on the other side of the table with her own cup of coffee. "Let me tell you something about Mr. Hawthorne," she began in a confidential tone. "He lost his wife 5 years ago, a health complication no one expected. Since then, he changed. Before, he was a sociable man, received visitors, went to parties in the region. After she was gone, he shut himself away. The library became his refuge. It belonged to his father, old Mr. Augustus, who was obsessed with books. When Mr. Augustus died, about 3 years ago, Bernard inherited everything, but the books had been neglected for a long time. The old man couldn't care for them properly anymore. Now they are being lost, and that torments Bernard. He feels he is failing his father's memory." Clara absorbed every word. "So he isn't just a distant boss," she thought. "He's a man carrying a double grief for his wife and his father." She understood better the loneliness she had sensed at the estate the night before. When she finished breakfast, Francis led Clara through the hallways of the house until they reached a double door of dark wood at the end of the east wing. She knocked lightly, and a deep voice on the other side answered to enter. Francis opened the door and motioned for Clara to pass. "Here is Miss Clara Miller, Mr. Hawthorne," she announced. Then she withdrew, closing the door slowly. Clara entered, and for the first time saw the library, and also for the first time saw Bernard Hawthorne. The room was immense, with a high ceiling and large windows that filled the space with natural light. All 4 walls were covered by wooden shelves from floor to ceiling, all packed with books. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Leather spines in shades of brown, red, dark green, some with faded gold lettering, titles in English, French, Latin. Clara felt her heart accelerate. She had never seen so many books together in her life, but what drew her attention most was their condition. Even from a distance, she could see the signs of decay. Dark spots of mold, loose bindings, pages warped by humidity, spines torn where silverfish had done their damage. It was a treasure slowly dying. In the center of the room, behind a huge desk covered in papers and open books, stood Bernard. He stood up when Clara entered. He was a tall, solid man, with the broad shoulders of someone used to physical work. He appeared to be around 40 years old. Dark brown hair with grey strands at the temples. He wore a thick beard, well-groomed. His eyes were an undefined color between grey and green, with an expression that was tired but alert. He wore a linen shirt without a jacket, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing strong, tanned forearms. He had large hands, but Clara noticed he held the books with surprising care for a man of his size. "Miss Clara Miller?" he asked with a deep voice that had a rough texture, as if rusty from lack of use. "Yes, sir," Clara replied, and her own voice came out even lower than usual. "Thank you for the opportunity." Bernard studied her for a long moment. His eyes travelled over the simple dress, the low bun, the small hands Clara kept clasped in front of her body. There was something in his look that wasn't judgment, but careful evaluation. "The lawyer told me you restored a book by yourself," he commented. "Can you show me?" Clara pulled the book of poems from the small bag she carried. She handed it to Bernard with both hands, an almost reverent gesture. He took it and examined it with an attention that made Clara realize this man truly understood books. He turned the pages slowly, observed the stitching of the spine, tested the firmness of the binding. His face remained expressionless, but Clara saw something change in his eyes. "You did this without proper tools?" he asked finally. "I did, sir. I used a common sewing needle and thread. It's not perfect, I know." Bernard closed the book carefully and looked at Clara. For the first time, she saw something that might be respect in that look. "It isn't technically perfect," he agreed, "but it is saved, and that is what matters. Many professional restorers I've met worry so much about technical perfection they forget the goal is to preserve, not impress." He placed the book on the table and gestured for Clara to approach. "Come," he said, "I want to show you what needs to be done." Clara walked to the table, and Bernard began taking volumes from the shelves, one by one, explaining the condition of each. "This one here has mold on the first 50 pages, he said as he opened a copy carefully. "This other one has the binding completely loose. That one there has torn and stained pages. This one lost its cover." Clara listened attentively, but her eyes were on the books. She saw titles she had never heard of. Treatises on philosophy, books of poetry and French, classic novels, history of the Americas, ancient medicine, botany. It was an entire universe captured in paper and ink, and it was vanishing. "How many books are here?" she asked, her voice full of admiration mixed with worry. 843, Bernard replied. "My father started the collection when he was young. He traveled to New York, Boston, even to London buying rare books. To him, they were more precious than land or cattle. When he fell ill, he stopped caring for the collection, and I confess, didn't know how to care for them properly. I tried hiring professionals, but they charged impossible amounts and wanted to take the books away to restore in studios in the capital. I couldn't allow that. This library needs to stay here. It was my father's dream." Clara heard the contained emotion in his voice. He wasn't a man to demonstrate feelings easily, but she perceived the pain hidden in those words. "I will do everything I can to save them," she said, with a conviction that surprised her. "I don't know if I can restore all of them perfectly, but I will try with all the care I have." Bernard looked at her, and for the first time his lips sketched something that almost looked like a smile. "That is all I ask," he said. "I don't want technical perfection. I want these books to continue existing." He spent the next hour showing Clara where the materials he had managed to buy were kept: special papers, different glues, binding tools, fine brushes. He explained that she had the freedom to work at her own pace, that there was no rush. The important thing was to do it well. Clara absorbed every piece of information like a sponge. She asked shy questions, but intelligent ones. Bernard noticed that she really understood what she was doing, even without technical training. There was something intuitive in the way she held the books, how her fingers touched the fragile pages. It was a care that couldn't be taught. It was born of genuine respect. When the sun was high in the sky, Bernard looked at his pocket watch. "You should start tomorrow," he said. "Today, just rest and familiarize yourself with the estate. Dinner is at 7. You can eat in the kitchen with Francis, or I can ask for it to be brought to your room as you prefer." Clara hesitated. "Where do you usually dine, sir?" "Right here most of the time," Bernard replied, indicating the table full of books. "I'm not much for formalities." Clara gathered courage for something she wouldn't normally do. "May I dine here as well?" she asked in a low voice. "I would like to spend more time with the books, to get to know them better before starting." Bernard seemed surprised for the first time since she had entered. He studied Clara again, as if seeing her truly for the first time. "Yes, you may," he replied finally. "Francis will bring trays for both of us then." Clara thanked him and left the library feeling something strange in her chest. It wasn't exactly happiness, not yet. It was a feeling that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she could belong. And if you're enjoying this story, leave a like and share it with someone who also loves narratives of overcoming odds. Now continue here with me, because the best is yet to come. The following days established a routine Clara had never experienced before. She woke early, had breakfast in the kitchen with Francis, and went to the library, where she spent the entire day working on the books. Bernard was always there, sitting at the large desk dealing with estate papers, but his presence was silent. They exchanged few words, but there was comfort in that shared silence. Clara started with the books in less critical condition. She chose a volume of poetry in English with a loose binding but pages still intact. She worked with infinite patience, dismantling the old structure, cleaning each section, preparing the new stitching. Her hands moved with delicate precision, fingers finding a natural rhythm in the minute work. Bernard observed discreetly. He saw how she held the ancient pages, how she tested the fragility of the paper before applying any pressure. He saw how she stopped when she wasn't sure, studied the problem, tried different solutions. There was no haste in her, only deep dedication. On the third day, he broke the silence. "Why did you learn to do this?" he asked, without taking his eyes off the papers in front of him. Clara raised her head, surprised by the question. "I don't know exactly," she replied honestly. "I think I always liked the idea of saving things. I was never good at other things. I'm slow, too shy. People always thought I was weak. But when I restore a book, I feel my hands are good for something important. I feel I am preserving something someone loved." Bernard finally looked at her. "It isn't weakness," he said with a firm voice. "It is a rare gift. Most people are fast and loud, but they have no care. You have something that cannot be taught." Clara felt her face heat up. No one had ever said that to her. Her delicacy had always been pointed out as a defect. Hearing someone call it a gift stirred something deep inside her. "Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne," she murmured. "You can call me just Bernard," he said, returning to his papers. "I don't like excessive formalities." Clara nodded and returned to work, but something had changed in that room. There was a connection forming, still fragile, still nameless, but real. In the following days, the conversations increased gradually. Bernard began telling stories about his father, about how old Augustus spent entire nights reading, about trips he took just to buy rare books. Clara listened attentively, asking shy questions that showed genuine interest. "Was he lonely too?" she asked one day, while working on a particularly damaged volume. Bernard thought before answering. "He had my mother," he said. "She died when I was young. After that, books became his company. I think he found in them something the real world didn't offer anymore." Clara understood perfectly. "And you, sir?" she asked with a boldness that surprised her. "Do you also find in books what the world doesn't offer?" There was a long silence. Clara thought she had been too invasive, that he wouldn't answer. But then Bernard spoke, his voice lower than usual. "I used to," he said. "After my wife passed away, books were the only thing that didn't ask me questions or demand I pretend to be okay. But lately," he admitted with hesitation, "I've realized books aren't enough. They are essential, but they aren't enough." Clara didn't know what to say. She kept working, but her hands trembled slightly. There was an intimacy in that confession that frightened and attracted her at the same time. Weeks passed. Clara restored 15 books, then 20, then 30. Each one was a different challenge. Some required only careful cleaning and new stitching. Others needed entire pages reconstructed, stains removed with techniques she invented as she went. Bernard brought more materials from Savannah whenever she asked. He seemed willing to invest whatever was necessary to save that library. Clara also began to know the estate better. On Sunday afternoons, when Bernard insisted she rest, she walked the grounds. She met Mr. Jenkins, the old foreman, who looked after the cattle and the hands. He was a man of few words, but kind eyes. When he saw Clara for the first time, he tipped his hat and said it was good to have a feminine presence in the house again. "Does the boss good," he commented, with the wisdom of someone who saw more than he let on. Clara also explored the gardens at the back of the house. They were partially abandoned, but wildflowers still grew among the weeds. She recognized jasmine, wild roses, hydrangeas. She started picking some and taking them to the library, placing them in a jar with water on the table where she worked. Bernard noticed, but didn't comment. He just looked at the flowers with an expression Clara couldn't decipher. One day she found on the lowest shelves of the library volumes that were in critical condition. They were very old books, some over 100 years old. The covers were completely destroyed, pages stuck together by mold, text almost illegible. Clara sat on the floor and examined them with a heavy heart. She didn't know if she could save those. Bernard noticed her concern. "Those are the worst," he agreed, coming to kneel beside her. "I've already accepted that perhaps those have no salvation." Clara picked one up with extreme care. It was a volume of natural history, with botanical illustrations that must have been beautiful before the mold. "I'll try," she said with determination. "It might take months, but I'll try." Bernard looked at her with an intense expression. "Why do you care so much?" he asked. "These are a stranger's books. They mean nothing to you." Clara held the book against her chest. "They do mean something," she replied. "They mean someone thought it was important to record this knowledge, that someone spent time drawing these illustrations, that your father loved them enough to buy and keep them. That makes them matter." Something changed in Bernard's face in that moment. He remained kneeling beside her, close enough for Clara to feel the warmth of his body. "You are a rare person, Clara Miller," he said with a husky voice. "Rarer than any book in this library." Clara felt her heart race. She looked at him and for the first time saw beyond the thick beard and the closed expression. She saw a man tired of carrying loneliness, a man who had forgotten how to connect with another human being. And she also saw something that scared her. She saw he was looking at her the same way she realized she looked at him when she thought she wasn't being watched. The moment was interrupted by Frances knocking on the door. "Sorry to intrude," she said, peeking inside. "But a visitor has arrived, Mr. Bernard. Your sister is here." Bernard's expression changed instantly. What was almost tenderness turned to tension. He stood up quickly, helped Clara up with an automatic gesture, and took a deep breath. "Tell her I'll be right there," he replied to Frances. The housekeeper left, and Bernard looked at Clara. "My sister Constance," he explained, with a tone that made it clear she wasn't a welcome visitor. "She lives in Macon, hasn't been here in months. If she's coming now, it's because she wants something." He left the library and Clara stood alone, still holding the natural history book against her chest. She could hear voices coming from the main parlor. A female voice, loud and decided, so different from hers. Then Bernard's deep voice, controlled but tense. Clara tried to return to work, but she was restless. That moment they had shared on the library floor had changed something. It had revealed feelings she didn't even know were growing, and now, with the arrival of his sister, she felt something was about to get complicated. She wasn't wrong. The next morning, when Clara entered the library, she found not just Bernard, but also an elegant woman sitting in the chair that used to be exclusively her brother's territory. She must have been around 45, wearing an expensive dress of fine fabric, an ornamented hat, and leather gloves. Her hair was done up in an elaborate style, and her face had aristocratic features that resembled Bernard's, but without the softness he showed when he thought no one was looking. "This is Clara Miller," Bernard introduced with a neutral voice. "The restorer I hired for the library. Clara, this is my sister, Constance Hawthorne Silvers." Constance studied Clara from head to toe with a look that didn't bother to hide the judgment. She saw the simple mended dress, the low bun without ornaments, the slumped posture. Her lips curled into something that wasn't exactly a smile. "So this is the famous restorer," she said with a tone that carried irony. "Bernard told me about you, said you are saving Daddy's library." Clara felt her face burn. "I am trying, Ma'am," she replied in a low voice. "Such admirable dedication," commented Constance, but the tone continued to suggest the opposite. "It must be very lonely work, just you and my brother here in this huge room all day long." Clara didn't know how to respond. She perceived the insinuation in the words, but she lacked the experience to deal with subtleties of that kind. Bernard, however, understood perfectly. "Constance," he said with a firm voice, "Clara is doing exceptional work. She has already restored over 30 volumes in less than 2 months. Professionals charging fortunes wouldn't do better." Constance shrugged and got up from the chair. "I'm sure she is," she agreed without conviction. "Well, I came here for a specific matter, Bernard. I need to speak with you. In private." Bernard indicated to Clara that she could withdraw. She left the library with a heavy heart, but not before hearing Constance start speaking. "William is returning from Atlanta next month," she said with false animation. "Said he wants to see you very much. You remember him, don't you? The Alcott's son, that young man, so polite and successful." Clara closed the door behind her, but stood in the hallway for a moment, unable to move. She didn't need to hear more to understand. Bernard's sister was arranging a suitor. Probably someone from a rich family, educated, suitable, someone completely different from her. She felt a sharp pain in her chest. She was a fool for imagining that those shared moments in the library meant something. Bernard was a rich landowner, a widower from a good family. She was a maid without means, without formal education, with nothing to offer but delicate hands that knew how to restore old paper. She went back to her room and sat on the bed, hugging her knees. The tears came silently, not because she had real hopes of something happening between her and Bernard, but because for the first time in her life she had felt that someone saw her as something beyond a walking defect. And now she realized that might be temporary. Constance stayed at the estate for 3 days. 3 days during which the atmosphere in the library changed completely. Bernard was tense, spoke less, worked on his papers with forced concentration. Clara tried to focus on the books, but she felt the weight of his sister's presence in the house. Constance appeared in the library several times a day, always with some excuse. Wanted to see the restored books. Wanted to ask about techniques. Wanted to know how much longer it would take. But Clara realized the true goal was different, to evaluate, judge, establish that she didn't belong there. On the afternoon of the second day, Constance caught Clara alone in the library while Bernard had gone out to resolve something with Mr. Jenkins. She sat in the chair opposite the table where Clara worked and smiled with a sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. "Can I ask you a question, Clara?" Clara nodded, her hands stopping their work. "Do you have family?" asked Constance. "Someone waiting for you in Savannah?" "I have a brother," replied Clara, "but we aren't close." Constance nodded as if that answer confirmed something. "And what do you plan to do when you finish here?" she continued, "when all the books are restored?" Clara had no answer. She hadn't thought about it. Didn't want to think about it. "I don't know," she admitted. Constance leaned forward, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. "Look, I see you are an honest girl, so I'm going to be honest with you too. My brother is a good man, but lonely. Since he became a widower, he isolated himself, and lonely people sometimes cling to whatever company they find. But that isn't love, you understand. It's just loneliness looking for relief." Clara felt every word like a blow. She said nothing. "Bernard needs a suitable wife," continued Constance. "Someone from a good family who understands the responsibilities of managing an estate like this. someone who can circulate in society, make the right connections. I have a friend in Macon, a widow too, a refined and educated woman. She would be perfect for him, and I know that if he weren't so distracted, he would see that too. Clara understood what Constance was really saying. You are the distraction. You are in the way. Clara felt the urge to defend herself, but the words didn't come, because part of her agreed. Part of her had always known she didn't belong there. I am just doing my job, she said finally, voice barely coming out. Nothing more. Constance smiled and patted Clara's arm, a gesture that seemed gentle but was condescending. I know, dear. I'm just warning you. Don't go creating impossible hopes. That will only hurt you in the end. She left the library, and Clara stood alone, looking at the open book in front of her without really seeing it. Constance's words echoed in her head. Don't go creating impossible hopes. But it was already too late for that. When Bernard returned, he found Clara working in silence. He noticed immediately that something was wrong. Are you all right? He asked. I am, lied Clara, without raising her eyes from the book. Bernard didn't seem convinced, but didn't insist. He sat at the desk and tried to work, but his eyes constantly returned to Clara. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands worked with mechanical movements instead of her usual dedication. What did my sister say to you? He asked finally. Clara raised her head, surprised. How did he know? Nothing important, she replied. Clara, insisted Bernard, I know my sister. I know when she is plotting something. What did she say? Clara hesitated. Part of her wanted to tell everything. Another part was ashamed to admit that Constance's words had affected her so much. She is just worried about you, sir, she said finally. She thinks you should consider marrying again, to someone suitable. Bernard closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them, there was clear frustration in them. My sister has no right to opine on my life, and much less to bother you with it. Clara didn't answer. She continued looking at the book. Bernard stood up and walked to her table. Clara, look at me, he asked. She obeyed reluctantly. When her eyes met his, she saw something that made her heart tighten even more. I don't care what my sister thinks is suitable, said Bernard with intensity. I already had a suitable marriage. I had a wife from the right society, with the right education, from the right family, and I loved her. But she is gone. And for 5 years, I tried to live among dead books because I didn't want to feel anything again. Until you arrived. Clara felt tears starting to form. Bernard continued, his voice getting lower but no less intense. You brought life back to this library, brought purpose, and brought something I had forgotten existed. I don't care if my sister approves or not. I don't care what society thinks is suitable. I care about what is happening here, in this room, between us. A tear slid down Clara's face. But I have nothing to offer, she whispered. I'm just a poor girl who knows how to restore books. I don't know how to circulate in society. I don't know how to be refined. I don't know how to be anything you need. Bernard took her hand, a gesture that made Clara hold her breath. You offer me something money can't buy, he said. You offer understanding. You offer peace. You offer a presence that doesn't demand I be anything other than what I am. That is worth more than any social refinement. Clara didn't know what to say. Her heart beat so hard she was sure he could hear it. Bernard still held her hand, his thumb caressing lightly the knuckles stained with restoration ink. The moment was interrupted by a loud knock on the door. Frances entered without waiting for an answer, looking worried. Sorry for the intrusion, she said quickly, but Miss Constance is in the parlour demanding to speak with you, sir. She said it is urgent. Bernard let go of Clara's hand reluctantly. I'll see what she wants, he murmured. Don't leave here. We haven't finished this conversation. He left and Clara stood alone again, heart still racing, hands still warm where he had touched. She knew this was going to complicate everything, but for the first time in her life, she didn't want to run from the complication. The argument in the main parlor was heard throughout the house. Constance wasn't trying to be discreet. Clara stayed in the library, trying to work, but the voices pierced the walls. She heard fragments. Constance's shrill voice saying things about family responsibility, about reputation, about what was proper. And Bernard's voice, deep and controlled, responding with a firmness that didn't yield. After almost an hour, the front door slammed shut. Clara went to the library window and saw Constance entering the carriage with a furious expression. The driver whipped the horses, and the vehicle departed, kicking up dust from the road. Bernard returned to the library a few minutes later. His face was tense, jaw clenched, but there was determination in his eyes. "My sister has gone," he announced, "and she won't be back any time soon, if it depends on me." Clara didn't know what to say. She felt responsible for causing conflict between siblings. "I'm sorry if I caused a problem," she began. "You caused nothing," interrupted Bernard. "Constance has always wanted to control my life. After my wife passed, she tried to marry me off to at least 5 different women. All from rich families, all refined, all completely wrong for me. I always refused. But this time," he continued, approaching Clara, "this time she realized there is something different, and she got desperate." Clara felt her heart accelerate again. "Something different?" she repeated softly. Bernard stopped in front of her, close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from him. "Clara," he said with a husky voice, "I am not a man of pretty words. I spent the last 5 years locked on this farm, buried in books and papers, convinced that life was over for me. But you changed that. I don't know when it happened exactly. If it was when I saw you hold that first book with a reverence few demonstrate. If it was when I realized you understood the value of what my father loved. If it was when I saw that your delicate hands could do the impossible. Or if it was simply by being in your presence every day, seeing your dedication, your kindness, your way of looking at the world." Clara was breathless. Tears began to form again, but this time they were different. "I know I am much older than you," Bernard continued. "I know I can seem harsh and difficult. I know I carry the baggage of a marriage and a loss, but I also know that when you are in this room, I breathe easier. When you smile, a rare thing that is, I feel the world gets less heavy. And when I imagine you leaving when the restoration is finished, I feel a void I haven't felt in 5 years." A tear rolled down Clara's cheek. "I feel it too," she confessed with a trembling voice. "I thought I was a fool for feeling it, that I was imagining things that didn't exist. But every morning I wake up anxious to come to this library, not just for the books, but because I know you will be here. Because in the last few months I felt seen for the first time in my life, not as a defect that needs fixing, but as a person who has value." Bernard raised his hand slowly and wiped the tear from her face with his thumb. The touch was gentle, careful. "Clara, you have more value than you imagine," he said. "And if you allow me, I would like to spend the rest of my life showing you that." Clara looked into his eyes and saw absolute truth. It wasn't an empty promise. It wasn't manipulation. It was a man tired of loneliness, offering a heart he had guarded for too long. "I don't know how to be a rich farmer's wife," she said honestly. "I don't know how to receive important visitors or organize elegant dinners. I don't know any of that." "I don't care about that," replied Bernard. "I need someone who understands what really matters, someone who sees value in things others ignore, someone who has patience for delicate work, whether with books or with a man who forgot how to open his heart. You are that person." Clara felt something break inside her. All the defenses she had built, all the years believing she was inadequate, everything crumbled. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her delicacy wasn't a weakness. That her careful hands had power, that her soft voice had its own strength. "Yes," she whispered. "If you think I can, then yes." Bernard pulled her into a hug that was firm but gentle. Clara rested her head on his chest and heard his heart beating strong. They stayed like that for a long time, in silence, surrounded by 800 books, witnessing that moment. When they finally pulled apart, Bernard held her face between his hands. "I'm going to do things right," he promised. "I'm going to ask for your hand officially. We'll have a simple ceremony, like you deserve, and we'll continue the restoration together. This library will be our project, not just mine." Clara smiled for the first time in days. It was a small, shy smile, but genuine. Bernard saw it and something lit up in his face. "That smile," he said, "is worth more than all the books in this place." The following days were different. There was a lightness in the air that hadn't existed before. Bernard and Clara worked side by side in the library, but now the silences were filled with looks that said more than words. Sometimes, when Clara concentrated on a particularly difficult job, Bernard simply watched, admiring her dedication. Other times, when he was lost in estate papers, Clara looked discreetly, studying the lines of his face, the way the light hit the grey strands at his temples. Frances noticed the change immediately. She saw how the two moved through the house with orbits that always crossed. She saw how Bernard smiled more. She saw how Clara walked with a posture a little less stooped. One afternoon, when Clara was in the kitchen helping to prepare preserves, Frances couldn't resist commenting. "Mr. Bernard is different," she said with a knowing smile. "It does him good to have you here." Clara blushed, but didn't deny it. "He does me good too," she admitted softly. "Mr. Jenkins also approved when Bernard told him his plans. The old foreman just nodded and said it was about time the boss started living again. "The farm needs joy again," he commented, "and Miss Clara seems like a good, honest person. That's all that matters." But not everything was simple. 2 weeks after Constance's departure, a letter arrived from her. Bernard read it with a closed expression and then crumpled the paper with force. "My sister is threatening to come with half the family to try to convince me to give up," he told Clara. "Says I am making a mistake, that I will regret it, that I need to think about the family reputation." Clara felt fear tighten her chest. "What if she manages to convince you?" she asked with a small voice. Bernard threw the crumpled letter into the fireplace and watched the paper catch fire. "She won't," he said with absolute firmness. "I have already made my decision. And no one, not my sister nor anyone else, is going to change that." But Clara saw the tension returning to his shoulders. She knew Bernard loved his sister despite everything. She knew family conflict hurt him, and she felt guilt growing. "I don't want to cause a rift between you," she said one night while they dined in the library. "Maybe it would be better if you finish that sentence saying you'll leave," interrupted Bernard with a hard voice. "I will be very upset." "Clara, you need to understand something. My sister isn't worried about me. She's worried about appearances, about what her rich friends will think, about maintaining a certain social status. That doesn't matter to me anymore. If it mattered one day, it doesn't anymore." Clara wanted to believe, wanted to desperately, but years of rejection had left marks. It was hard to simply accept that someone would choose her, especially against their whole family. Her answer came unexpectedly. A week later, Clara was in the library working on one of the most damaged books, the natural history one, with botanical illustrations she had promised to try to save. She had spent weeks developing a technique to separate the pages stuck together by mold without destroying the paper. It was minute work requiring superhuman patience. That day, she finally managed to separate the central pages that had been completely glued together for decades. And when she opened it, she revealed a full illustration of a rare orchid, perfectly preserved despite the mold around it. The colors were still vivid, the details incredible. It was like discovering hidden treasure. "Bernard," she called with a voice louder than normal, full of emotion. "I did it!" He came running, thinking something was wrong. When he saw the revealed illustration, he stopped. For a long moment, he simply stared. Then he looked at Clara, at her hands still holding the book with infinite care, at her face lit up with genuine joy. "My father spent years looking for this book," he said with a choked voice. "When he finally found it, it was already in this state. He never saw this illustration, thought it was lost forever." Clara looked at the page with renewed reverence. "So I saved something not even your father saw," she murmured. "I saved something that was lost." Bernard pulled her into a sudden hug, squeezing with a strength that showed the depth of his emotion. "You have no idea what this means," he said against her hair. "You have no idea." It was in that moment Clara finally understood. She wasn't there for charity. She wasn't being tolerated. She was necessary. Her delicate hands, her infinite patience, her dedication that others called slowness, all of it had a real purpose. She was saving a legacy. She was preserving memories. She was doing something no one else could, and she was being loved for it. That night, during dinner in the library, Bernard went to the desk and returned with a small velvet box. "Clara," he said, kneeling in front of her, "I should have done this more formally, should have prepared a pretty speech, but I am not a man of formalities, so I will ask here, in this place that has become ours, surrounded by the books you saved and are saving, will you accept to marry me? Will you accept to continue this life by my side, restoring not just books, but also the heart of a man who had forgotten how to love?" Tears flowed freely down Clara's face now. "I accept," she said. "Yes, I accept." Bernard opened the box, revealing a simple gold ring with a small blue stone. "It belonged to my grandmother," he explained. "It isn't showy, but it has history. It has value." "Like the books," said Clara, smiling through tears. "It doesn't need to be perfect to have value." He placed the ring on her finger and then pulled her in for a kiss. It was their first kiss, hesitant at the beginning, then deeper. It carried a promise of a future, a promise of partnership, a promise of love that didn't need to be loud to be real. When they separated, they rested their foreheads together, breaths mixed. "We will face my family together," promised Bernard. "It won't be easy, but we'll go together." And if you like emotional stories like this, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any narratives of overcoming odds and true love. Now come with me, because this story is reaching its most emotional moment. Bernard's family did indeed come. 3 weeks later, a procession of carriages arrived at Silent Valley Estate. Constance brought her husband, 2 of Bernard's brothers with their wives, and even a distant cousin who apparently had an opinion on everything. Clara was terrified. Bernard held her hand firmly while they received the family in the main parlor. "You don't need to prove anything to them," he whispered in her ear. "Just be yourself." But being herself was exactly what Clara feared. Her voice vanished when she was nervous. Her hands shook. She lowered her head instinctively when someone spoke loudly. Bernard's family was exactly as Clara imagined, elegant, talkative, used to being listened to. Constance commanded the conversations, directing questions to Clara that seemed innocent but carried judgment. "Where are you from, dear? What does your family do? Did you have formal education?" Clara answered with an increasingly low voice, feeling herself shrink with every question. She saw the exchanged glances, the raised eyebrows, the condescending smiles. Finally, one of the brothers, Anthony, got straight to the point. "Bernard," he said, with a tone that tried to be friendly but was authoritative, "we understand you are lonely. We understand you want company, but marriage is a serious thing. There are questions of estate, of family, of social standing. You need to think about this." "I have thought," replied Bernard with a calm that contrasted with the tension in his jaw. "I have thought a lot, and my decision is made." Constance leaned forward. "Bernard, be sensible. This girl is—" She seemed to look for words that weren't directly offensive. "Is sweet, I'm sure, but she has neither the education nor experience to be a farmer's wife. She doesn't know how to handle stuff, doesn't know how to receive society, doesn't know anything she needs to know." Clara felt every word like a blade, because they were true. She really didn't know any of that. But then Bernard did something unexpected. He stood up and pulled Clara with him. "Come with me," he said to the family. "I want to show you something." He led everyone to the library. The family entered the wide space full of books and looked around with curiosity mixed with impatience. Bernard went to one of the shelves and started taking down volumes. "This book," he said, showing the first one, had mold that destroyed 50 pages. Clara saved every one of them. He took another. This one had a completely loose binding. Clara stitched it back. Another one. This one had illustrations my father never saw because the pages were stuck for decades. Clara revealed them. He continued picking up book after book, showing the work Clara had done. The family watched in growing silence. "You are worried if she knows how to receive society," continued Bernard with a firm voice. "If she knows how to give orders to staff, if she has formal education. But none of you asked what really matters. Does she have the patience that trained professionals don't have? Does she have dedication for work that takes months without immediate results? Does she have reverence for things others consider lost? The answer is yes. She has all of that." Constance tried to interrupt, but Bernard raised his hand. "I haven't finished. My father spent his whole life collecting these books. It was his treasure, his legacy. When he died, I tried to preserve it, but didn't know how. I paid fortunes to professionals who promised and didn't deliver. I was watching everything get lost, until Clara arrived. She, with her delicate hands that you think are weak, saved more than 100 volumes in 4 months. She did what no one else could, and you want me to dismiss that because she doesn't know how to organize an elegant dinner." There was a heavy silence. Then Anthony spoke, tone a bit softer. "No one is denying her work is impressive, Bernard. But marriage isn't about professional skills, it's about life partnership." "Exactly," agreed Bernard, "and Clara is the best partner I could find. She understands me, understands what I value, doesn't pressure me to be something I'm not, doesn't demand I circulate in society if I don't want to, doesn't judge me for preferring the library to parties. She simply accepts me, and I accept her. Is that not life partnership?" Clara felt tears forming again. No one had ever defended her like that. No one had ever seen value in her in that way. One of the sisters-in-law, Beatrice, who had stayed quiet until then, finally spoke. "Can I ask a question?" she said, looking at Clara. Clara nodded, bracing herself for more judgment. "Do you love my brother-in-law?" asked Beatrice directly. Clara looked at Bernard, then back at Beatrice. "I do," she replied, and this time her voice came out firm. "I love the way he cares for his father's books. I love how he treats the workers with respect. I love how he never tried to change me or make me be someone I'm not. I love the peace I feel when I am in his presence. It might not be the type of love you consider suitable, but it is real." Beatrice smiled. "Then I think that settles everything," she said, looking at the rest of the family. "Real love is worth more than any formal education." Constance huffed. "Beatrice, you have always been too romantic." "And you have always been too practical," replied Beatrice without flinching. "Bernard already had a suitable marriage, had a society wife, and he was happy, I won't deny it. But now he has found something different, something that works for him in this moment of life. Who are we to judge? The tension in the room lessened a little. It wasn't total approval, but it was a start. Anthony sighed. If this is what you want, Bernard, we won't stand in the way. But we hope you know what you are doing. I know exactly, replied Bernard, with absolute conviction. The family stayed 2 more days at the estate. During that time, some of the women tried to get to know Clara better. Beatrice was particularly kind, talking about simple subjects, making Clara feel less judged. Constance remained cold, but at least stopped making cutting comments. On the morning they left, Constance had a last conversation with Bernard. Clara didn't hear what was said, but saw Constance hug her brother briefly before getting into the carriage. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a truce. When the carriages disappeared down the road, Bernard returned to the library where Clara was working. He sat beside her and took her hand. "Still want this?" he asked. "Still want to marry me, knowing part of my family will never completely approve?" Clara interlaced her fingers with his. "I do," she replied without hesitation, "because I am not marrying your family, I am marrying you." Bernard smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face. "Then let's start planning. Simple ceremony, few guests, here at the estate. What do you think?" Clara agreed. It was exactly what she wanted. Nothing showy, nothing that would make her feel out of place. Just sincere promises exchanged in the place that had become her home. The wedding happened 2 months later, on a clear November morning. It was a small ceremony in the estate chapel, an old stone building surrounded by gardens Clara had started to tend. Francis cried during the vows. Mr. Jenkins served as a witness. Father Anselm, who came from the nearby village, conducted the ceremony with appropriate simplicity. Clara wore a simple white muslin dress that Francis had helped sew. Her hair was pinned with wildflowers from the garden. There was no elaborate veil or expensive ornaments, but when she entered the chapel and saw Bernard waiting, she saw in his eyes that she was perfect, exactly as she was. The vows were traditional, but when Bernard said, "I promise to love and respect," his voice carried the weight of absolute truth. And when Clara responded with her soft voice, "I promise to care for and support," she knew she was making a promise she would keep forever. After the ceremony, there was a simple lunch on the veranda of the main house. A few close neighbors had been invited. Beatrice came representing the family. Constance didn't come, but sent a gift, a fine porcelain tea set. It was a small gesture, but significant. In the afternoon, when the guests had gone, Bernard and Clara found themselves alone in the library for the first time, as husband and wife. It was strange and familiar at the same time. Everything had changed, but nothing had changed. They were still 2 people finding peace in each other's presence, surrounded by books that told stories of lives that came before. Bernard pulled Clara into a long hug. "Thank you," he whispered in her hair. "For what?" asked Clara. "For saving me," he replied. "Just like you saved these books." Clara smiled against his chest. "You saved me too, showed me that being delicate isn't a weakness, that a soft voice can have power, that careful hands have value." They stayed like that until the sun began to set, painting the library in golden tones. It was the beginning of something new, something built on mutual respect, deep understanding, and a love that didn't need to shout to be heard. The following months established a new rhythm at Silent Valley Estate. Clara continued the restoration work, but now as the lady of the house, not just an employee. The difference was subtle but important. The staff treated her with genuine respect. Francis consulted her on household decisions. Mr. Jenkins came to ask for opinions on farm matters. Clara discovered she didn't need to be authoritarian to have authority. Her soft voice, when she spoke with conviction, was heard. Her gentle suggestions were considered. She didn't change her nature to fit the role of a farmer's wife. Instead, She redefined the role to fit her. Bernard watched the transformation with silent pride. He saw how Clara blossomed when she had the security of being accepted, how she laughed more, how she walked with her head a little higher, how her hands worked on the books with growing confidence. Together, they developed a plan for the library. When the restoration was complete, they would open the collection to the public. It would be a public library, the first in the region where anyone could come to consult the volumes. It was a way to honor the memory of old Augustus, sharing the treasure he had accumulated. Clara worked tirelessly on the most damaged books. Some took weeks. One particularly difficult one, a volume of 18th century French poetry, took 3 months. But she didn't give up. Page by page, word by word, she brought back something that seemed lost forever. Bernard frequently stopped what he was doing just to watch her work. He saw how the afternoon light hit her hair, how she bit her lower lip when concentrated, how her hands moved with a surgeon's precision, and he felt deep gratitude for having found that woman, for having the courage to defy conventions to be with her. One afternoon, almost a year after the wedding, Clara was finishing the restoration of the last problematic book. It was the natural history volume that had revealed the orchid illustration, now completely restored. She stitched the last thread of the new binding, cut the excess string, and held the complete book in her hands. "Done," she said with a voice full of emotion. "It's done." Bernard got up from the desk and came to see. The book was transformed. It still had marks of time, still had imperfections, but it was whole. It was saved. It was ready to be read by future generations. "How many in total?" asked Bernard. Clara had kept a careful record. 843, she replied. "All of them. We managed to save them all." Bernard picked her up in his arms and spun her, a gesture so spontaneous and joyful that Clara laughed aloud, a crystal-clear sound that echoed through the library. When he put her back on the floor, both were grinning widely. "You did the impossible," said Bernard with a choked voice. "Did something I thought would never happen." "We did," corrected Clara. "It was our work. You brought the materials, the support, the patience. I just used my hands." "No," disagreed Bernard. "You used much more than hands. You used your heart. And that makes all the difference." They decided to celebrate the conclusion of the work with a small event. They invited local authorities, Father Anselm, some neighboring farmers, and, with hesitation, Bernard's family. It would be the official inauguration of the Augustus Hawthorne Library, open to the public. The day of the inauguration arrived sunny and clear. Clara was nervous, but Bernard held her hand firmly. "You saved this place," he reminded her. "You have every right to be proud of that." People began to arrive. Curious neighbors, teachers from the village school, the local judge, and to Clara's surprise, all of Bernard's family, including Constance. His sister entered the library and looked around with an expression Clara couldn't decipher. She walked slowly by the shelves, picked up a few volumes, examined the restoration work. Finally, she came to where Clara stood. "It is impressive work," said Constance with a formal voice. "You truly saved something important." It wasn't a complete apology. It wasn't total acceptance, but it was recognition. And for Clara, it was enough. "Thank you," she replied with sincerity. Constance nodded and went to speak with her brother. Clara saw her touch Bernard's arm briefly, a small but significant gesture. Maybe with time, Clara thought, even Constance would understand. Father Anselm blessed the library. Bernard made a short speech explaining the history of the collection and publicly thanking Clara for the exceptional work. Clara blushed with the attention, but accepted the applause with the shy grace that was characteristic of her. Afterward, people circulated freely through the library, admiring the books, asking questions. Clara answered patiently, explaining restoration techniques, showing examples of before and after. She saw the genuine interest on people's faces and felt pride grow in her chest. She had done something that mattered, something that would last. When night fell and the guests left, Bernard and Clara were left alone in the library once more. They were tired but satisfied. "You looked beautiful today," commented Bernard, pulling her close. "Confident, happy. It was beautiful to see." "I was happy," admitted Clara. "For the first time in my life I felt I really achieved something important, something no one can take from me." "And it is just the beginning," promised Bernard. "This library will impact generations, and all because of you." Clara rested her head on his shoulder. "Because of us," she corrected. "Because of a man who believed in a girl no one wanted. Because of a farmer who saw value where others only saw weakness." They stood embraced among the shelves, surrounded by the 843 volumes that had become the symbol of their journey, books that had been dying and now lived, just like two hearts that had forgotten how to love and now loved fully. Years passed gently at Silent Valley Estate. The library became a landmark in the region. Students came to consult rare volumes. Teachers brought classes to see the collection. Researchers from Savannah made regular visits. Clara continued caring for the books, doing preventive maintenance, teaching preservation techniques to those interested. She discovered she liked teaching, passing on the knowledge she had developed. Bernard and Clara developed a partnership that went far beyond the library. She began to get more involved in estate management, bringing an attention to detail that complemented his broad vision. Together, they made the farm more prosperous and the staff more satisfied. Francis frequently commented that the house had returned to life. There was laughter again. There were animated conversations during meals. There was hope in the air. 5 years after the wedding, on an autumn afternoon, Clara was in the library organizing a new acquisition of books, when Bernard entered with a mysterious expression. "I have a surprise," he announced. Clara looked at him curiously. "What kind of surprise?" He took her hand and led her out of the house, crossing the gardens Clara had transformed into a lush space of flowers and plants. They stopped in front of a small building that was being erected at the back of the property. "Remember you mentioned wanting your own space to teach restoration?" asked Bernard. "A place where you could receive apprentices and pass your knowledge on?" Clara nodded, heart accelerating. "Well," said Bernard with a smile, "this will be your studio. A space dedicated for you to work, teach, create. It will be ready in 2 months. Clara felt tears fill her eyes. "You built this for me," she whispered. "For us," corrected Bernard. "Because your work matters. Because what you do needs to continue. Because you deserve a space that reflects the importance of what you achieve." Clara hugged him tight, feeling gratitude overflow. "I never imagined having all this," she confessed. "Never imagined someone would see me like this." Bernard held her face between his hands. "I see you," he said, "always saw and always will see." They stood there, embraced in the middle of the garden, observing the construction that represented one more chapter in the life they were building together. A life that proved delicacy had power, that a soft voice had strength, that careful hands could save entire worlds. 10 years after the wedding, on a clear spring morning, Clara was in the studio working with 3 apprentices. She was teaching binding techniques to 2 girls from the village and a young man from Savannah who had come especially to learn from her. Her reputation had spread. She was known throughout the state as a master restorer, despite never having had formal education. Bernard entered the studio carrying a tray with coffee and biscuits Francis had prepared. He placed it on the side table and stood watching Clara teach. He saw how the apprentices hung on her every word. How Clara, who one day had a voice so low it was barely heard, now spoke with natural authority about a subject she dominated completely. When the class ended and the apprentices left, Bernard approached. "Do you remember the day you arrived here?" he asked. "Scared, insecure, thinking you wouldn't manage?" Clara smiled. I do. Seems like another life. It is another life, agreed Bernard. You became another person. Or better, became fully who you always were, but the world tried to hide. Clara took his hand. And you? She asked. Do you remember how you were before? Closed off, lonely, buried in dead books? Bernard laughed. Also seems like another life. You brought me back. Reminded me that living isn't just existing between pages. It is feeling, sharing, building something together with someone. They left the studio holding hands, walking through the gardens that had become their refuge. They passed the library, now thriving and always full of visitors, past the main house where Francis hummed in the kitchen, past the fields where Mr. Jenkins, very old now but still working, supervised the hands. All that was theirs, not just as property, but as legacy, as proof that two imperfect people could create something perfect together, as testimony that true love didn't need to follow social rules or family expectations. It just needed to be honest, respectful, and constant. That night, sitting on the veranda watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange, Clara rested her head on Bernard's shoulder. I am happy, she said simply, happier than I ever imagined possible. Bernard kissed the top of her head. Me too. And I will spend the rest of my life showing you that you always deserved this happiness, always were worthy, always were valuable. And so, while the sun descended on the horizon of Silent Valley Estate, two hearts that had found each other between ancient pages celebrated the life they had built. A life where delicacy was strength, where shyness was grace, where careful hands saved not just books, but also souls. The story of Clara Miller and Bernard Hawthorne became a legend in the region. People told their children about the delicate restorer who saved an entire library, about the lonely farmer who had the courage to love beyond conventions, about two people who proved that the rejected of the world can find within themselves a value no one else saw. And in the library, among 843 perfectly preserved volumes, there was a special space for a book Clara had restored alone years ago, that book of poems that had been her doorway to a new life. It was in a glass case with a small plaque. The first book, saved by Clara Miller. May it remind us that even the most damaged things can be restored when they find the right hands. And everyone who read that plaque understood it didn't speak only of books. It spoke of hearts, of lives, of hopes. It spoke of everything the world considers lost, but that patient and dedicated love can bring back to life. At Silent Valley Estate, surrounded by books that witness centuries of human history, Clara and Bernard lived, proving that no one is too weak to be loved. No one is too delicate to have value, and that sometimes the life of your dreams doesn't come from becoming someone different, but from finding someone who loves exactly who you are.